Thanks again for everyone joining. For those of you who aren't familiar with me, I'm Dan, an account manager here at Beauhurst. My responsibility is to ensure my clients are comfortable with the platform and ensure their commercial success. And over the past year, I've had the privilege of working with Peter. Peter Mitchell is the Director of Data Science and Technology at Future Planet Capital. And I'm particularly excited to have him here today, as I'm a huge fan of their investment thesis and the work they do. So I think I'll hand over to Peter to pick up on that intro and explain a little bit more about his role.
Perfect. Very nice to be speaking with you today, Dan. As you mentioned, I'm a director at Future Planet Capital. I lead up our data science and technology efforts. We're academic data scientist by background. So I did my master's at Harvard, my PhD at Oxford. I did some dabbling in edtech investing and edtech companies before joining Future Planet to build out Datalace, which is our data-driven platform that identifies promising companies from around the world's top ecosystems, typically around universities. And what we do is we work with our partner managers, source great deals, then collect as much information as possible on those companies and try to make sense of that information by highlighting those companies that have indicators of future financial, but also impact success. We're an impact-driven VC. Future Planet is a $460 million British VC investing globally. The company is broadly split into 3 investment strategies. So we have a regional team investing in the Midlands on behalf of the British Business Bank and some local pension funds there. We have a national strategy that's investing on behalf of the UK government into pre-seed and seed stage, really early stage companies coming out of research centres around the country doing hard to do things like engineering, biology, nuclear fusion, security, and much else. And then finally, we have a global growth strategy, which invests around the world into companies that are aiming to make the world a considerably better place, but also do so profitably for the benefit of our shareholders. On that strategy, we invest on behalf of a range of different investors, some pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and we have some high net worths through a partnership with Barclays Private Bank. So a broad investment mandate from pre-seed right to Series B, and we can touch on some of how data is used to facilitate those strategies.
Awesome. Thank you, Peter. To give a quick overview of how the session today will run, it'll be largely a Q&A conversation between Peter and myself, but there will be some time for questions from the attendees. So if you have any questions for Peter or myself, please do pop those in the chat. There are a few Beauhurst moderators popping around there. We might be able to answer a few, but we do have time at the end to cover those off. Fantastic. And for those non-users with us today, Beauhurst has data on all private UK and German companies in the wider funding ecosystem that supports them. To kick us off, Peter, could you give us an overview of how Future Planet Capital has been using and leveraging Beauhurst data?
Sure. So Beauhurst is our trusted source of UK data. We're obviously a global firm, so when we started this data expansion or the capabilities of our data-driven investment process, we looked across a range of different data providers. We found a global data provider, but we also acknowledged the need for a separate UK provider, assuming that the quality was significantly better. Beauhurst is that provider for us. As I alluded to earlier in the description of the firm, quite a large chunk of the capital that we're deploying is for UK companies, often at the early stage where getting information quickly is quite difficult. So we're really pleased to be using Beauhurst in a range of different ways, and I can kind of briefly touch on what some of those are. At the very kind of simplest, it's a nice way of looking up companies before our investment teams meet them, just to have a kind of quick information digest alongside the deck. We also have for quite a long time used some of the alerts so that teams get weekly emails for companies that have come onto the system that are likely to match their investment mandate. We've kind of ramped up the level of automation and other information ingestion into those alerts, but it's very easy to set up. You don't need a data science team to do so. And there's a lot of benefit to be had there. Valuation data is a very crucial thing as we're trying to work out what is an appropriate valuation for the rounds that we're leading, but or indeed checking those that we're following into. Beauhurst often is a good source where we can sense check some of those numbers. We've also used it for building out investment strategies. So we've again embellishing it with other data sources as well. But Beauhurst we're building we are launching a British growth stage fund, and as part of the design of the investment strategy, we downloaded information on all past exits that have happened for companies within our thesis. Saw what type of characteristics they are at different stages of their development, and then designed an investment strategy that at least acknowledged some of those characteristics as we go forward in the future. And then finally, most recently, we've been working on pulling out data on advisors and people that we can work with to achieve exits for some of our companies. And that's been a kind of exciting thing as the portfolio matures, and we are increasingly focused on ensuring that our LPs receive distribution. So we're kind of working out exactly how Beauhurst may feed into that. So in short, a range of different approaches. I should flag those avenues weren't immediately apparent on day one. And so they kind of, often what happens is we have a pain point or we have a project that we're working on, and quite quickly we say, oh, I'm sure Beauhurst has something useful that can contribute to the end. And often it does. So those projects or those use cases have come out of things that we've been working on over the last couple of years.
Awesome to hear how that usage has evolved while you've been using Beauhurst as well. I guess to take us right back to the beginning, if you can speak to what first motivated Future Climate Capital to adopt a more data-driven approach.
Sure. So what we see across the world is that there is an opportunity, a really exciting opportunity for both data-driven VC to take off, but also the need for an increasingly data-driven angle. When we started doing data-driven VC, we were trying to fulfill an investment strategy where we looked across all of these different ecosystems around the world, in the US and the UK, and we identified the most promising companies irrespective of where they were. So the idea being that you get out of the trap that lots of VCs face where they only invest in companies that they can drive to. I think it's in 90 minutes or so. And so what we wanted to make sure is that if there's a great fusion company in Oxford, we want to also make sure that there's not a better one in MIT or Cambridge or wherever. And so what we wanted to make sure is that we had this full global coverage to make informed decisions before we went down into the rabbit hole of traditional deep due diligence. And we think that the conditions have arrived, both because of the massive increase in the number of data points, but the quality of those data points as well, which is facilitated by, in part anyway, by data providers like yourself, but also the models and the software and application layer to make sense of that information. And that, particularly in the last 12 months, is a booming sector, which I think the biggest and best investors in VC are increasingly throwing resource at, because they acknowledge that the way that VC is fundamentally changing. In the early days, there was that focus on fulfilling the international mandate of looking everywhere at all at once. There was also more and more capital coming into our early stage UK focused funds. And because we write from those vehicles, we write relatively small checks, there was a need to ramp up deployment and become increasingly efficient in the way that we do that pre-screening, so that the investment teams were not spending ages talking to companies that didn't match or weren't ever going to be eligible for funding, but also so that we didn't miss promising teams that, we just happened to not talk to an event or, we didn't pop up on their radar for whatever reason. That wasn't to say that that's the only channel that we've been aggressively pursuing to make sure we have that full coverage, but it's definitely an important one.
Interesting. You mentioned kind of those more traditional VCs and how they'll still exist, and I believe it's a largely relationship-driven piece.
Sure.
Where do you see there's a bit of a combination between the data-driven approach and that more traditional approach, a relationship, to being able to drive 90 minutes?
Yeah. So I think the edge that data-driven VC gives you is the breadth, and then some of the efficiency gains. So you can see far more deals than a human could possibly do. You can also collect far more data and hold that information than a human brain can. Today, you don't have anywhere near as much depth of information on a company as you would as a human after you spend 45 minutes, an hour looking into that company and the sector and the team and such. So you gain a breadth of information that lends itself to the beginning of the investment process. So you can pull up your funnel or indeed fill any gaps that may be missing from a traditional approach. You're still probably going to need the traditional approach for reaching out to companies, making sure that there's a good fit financially, but also from a personality skill set match, particularly at the earlier stage if you're going to be in bed with a company for 10 years. And then lots of the value add stuff will also happen through speaking and such. But you kind of have bigger eyes, as it were. The other thing is that you can stay on top of a scaled pipeline without having to massively increase headcount by making sure that information that you need to say quick no's predominantly are in the right place at the right time. So you're not spending too much time chasing deals that are never going to get done anyway. So you can have more headspace to speak and think and write and do deals in the right place.
Nice. And you mentioned there, I think, and early on, founder engagement. Could you speak a little bit to how Beauhurst supports that piece of work you do?
Sure. So Beauhurst has lots of contact information, which can be very useful when, where say if you find that there are 50 new companies that meet a mandate that are worth reaching out to. We do other kind of embellishments from LinkedIn and such, where you say, oh, look, of those 50, 20 have serial founders. They seem to have good track record on some kind of initial indicators. They're definitely worth reaching out to. One of the big hurdles that we had in the early days, as you're kind of building this approach, is that it can be very painful to get from I should do this to I actually am going to get a meeting with them. And so once you've built the information layer, the application layer of actually reaching out to them in an effective, streamlined manner that doesn't take your whole day is really important. Part of that is having a good CRM, but also the CRM is only as good as the information that you're feeding into it. So Beauhurst providing the contact details of founders, or indeed alerting us to who the co-investors are in the company that we can then also have outreach to, is critical for kind of moving past, oh, that's a nice finding, to, actually I'm going to have coffee with them and pick this up in practice.
Nice. Awesome. And then I guess, what advice, and then you shared a good amount of it, what advice in summary would you give to VCs starting out, looking to leverage data tools like Beauhurst to gain that competitive edge? Sure.
So a couple of points. The first is that it's a relatively low entry point. Beauhurst is not incredibly expensive, particularly when you compare it to the other budgets that you might spend flying people out to different events. So it's a good starting point to just get a subscription and start to explore. There needs to be one person in the company that's championing it, and they need to have the backup of people with sway in the business, wherever that may be. And then they need to have the time and the space to iteratively work out how this new way of investing can fit into the existing investment process. And there will be ways to do so. And then I guess a wider acknowledgement that if you're one of the few people that are not doing this, you're likely to be left behind and miss things. And as a kind of a business that invests in technology, we should be grabbing these types of innovations with both hands to kind of do what we're also preaching, or indeed trying to preach. Those are some of them. You'll get a lot further than you initially thought on day one. Use cases will emerge. You've just got to be open to them.
Brilliant. Awesome. Thank you for that, Peter. I've had a question from Robert here, and I think this one might be one for you, Peter. How do you integrate your data sources with your CRM?
Yeah.
And how do you apply that AI? I think that speaks to that data lace piece you mentioned earlier.
Sure. So we have we use Affinity as our CRM. So there's a certain amount of reformatting that when you're downloading data from Beauhurst to put into Affinity that needs to take place. Initially, we were writing Python scripts so that we could download a CSV, reformat it to the Affinity, and then put it back into Affinity. Reformat it so it's ready to be uploaded onto Affinity. Nowadays, you don't even need to have a data scientist because you can do all of that on ChatGPT. So we still have the same original scripts that we wrote a couple of years ago, but I would advise everybody to just go on to ChatGPT. If you want, it will work in R. You just need someone with any programming language, and they will write you scripts that can reformat it so that it's easily uploadable into your own CRM. We're increasingly looking at putting the API directly into our systems, and that's an exciting new thing. We're just plugging in other bits first, but Beauhurst is going to be there. If we were a purely UK focused outfit, that would have been number one. It's just at the moment, because we have global mandates, we need to start with our global providers of data before we embellish that with Beauhurst.
Awesome. Thank you, Peter. I think it's worth noting if your CRM is HubSpot, Salesforce, we do have plug and play integrations for those as well. So if you are an existing user, do reach out to your account manager about that. Fantastic. I think, Peter, now we can open it up. If there's any other questions from the attendees, do pop them into the chat. Peter and I will be happy to cover them off. Got a few here. Peter, one from an L. What data points do you wish you had access to help your DD or investment strategy?
In particularly in Beauhurst, I suspect so. It's a good question. I suspect that often the biggest thing is timing, getting the data fast enough so that it is actionable, because sometimes there's a little bit of a lag because it's often pulled from company house databases. So that's something that we're working on, and we're kind of accepting lower accuracy from LinkedIn or other places that we're looking at, and then kind of getting the gold standard when eventually it comes from Beauhurst. Some of the founder data, we're working very hard to make sure that that's processed in the right way, and Beauhurst is a nice source for that. But that could be always better. I think the nice thing to do is to start with what you care about from your investment thesis and what makes a good company, team, market, whatever, and then work out what the proxies are in Beauhurst and other data providers. I think there's always appetite for lots of valuation data and live valuation data in a way that is easily accessible. and that sometimes we need to do a bit of wrangling for that. Those are the top of their mind thoughts on that point.
Awesome. Thank you, Peter. I think we'll tackle one for me, and I see there's Adam and Graham in there as well. I'll answer the one from Robert. What steps is Beauhurst taking to feed data into CRMs? Well, Robert, we do have an API, as Peter mentioned. There's two models to it, a classic model and a full model. The classic model is largely company data with financials. You've also got shareholders in there, and the full API includes a view on news flow, funds in there. And if you have a data resource, data director, someone who can build out the back end on your side, we can offer that API to you. If you have a CRM like HubSpot or Salesforce, there are plug-and-play integrations that allow you to pull those company data points into your CRMs. And we also have HubSpot Enrich, so that enriches overnight. So do reach out to your AM about exploring all three of those options to see what works best for you. I've got one from Graham here, Peter.
Okay.
Assuming US and other global VCs are using similar data-driven AI tools to look at UK investments, do you see capital markets becoming more competitive here and the potential of increased capital coming into the UK?
Yes. There are data, the influx of new data streams is going to allow a more globally active investor base that moves away from just targeting its specific geographic reach. And we're seeing this. We're very lucky that we go to different ecosystems on a regular basis. Every quarter we're at demos in Harvard, MIT, Berkeley, Stanford. We've got partners in India. We go to Singapore. We go to Israel. So we have quite a nice view of how all of these different venture ecosystems are developing. And what you really see in a major way is an uptake and a kind of cultural shift that allows people to do a large amount of their business online outside of kind of having coffees and traditional VC approaches. So obviously part of that was COVID and that everyone had to move virtually, and so deals were being done virtually. But also emerging managers, for example, we were with a great emerging manager in India recently, and they are really, really leaning in to finding great teams at the early stages, more or less exclusively outbound to those teams through social media. Or we're seeing other people in the UK that are doing a lot of outbound within the Gen AI space to people on GitHub that have traction. So this kind of allow people to come to you because you've got a great reputation and you know the right people. This, I'd say, like the slightly lazy VC, where you're waiting to be the kingmaker as people approach, is being dropped around the world in exchange for being more proactive and identifying the needle in the haystack using data-driven techniques. And there are a whole host of applications that will be built on top of data sets like Beauhurst. And because of the quality of Companies House and the quality that Beauhurst has managed to garner, there'll be some great applications within the UK, either built in-house, like some firms are doing, or indeed eventually more open software products that you guys can that anyone can purchase.
Awesome. Thank you, Peter. And just the speed that we're adding new integrations, I've been on some leave, and since then I've also put Josh in the chat that we've recently made integrating our data easier with Zapier integration as well. So just to note that in there. I've got a question from El here, Peter, more about how long did it take you, the team, to get trained up and firing on Beauhurst? So you always have your early adopters who love this kind of stuff. In our experience, there tends to be a few senior people that love it, and then a lot of people who are earlier on in their career that are willing to try these new things because they're less wedded to what they've always done. Those people, it's about a month,
max. It's just like finding time in their diary. You probably need to check in regularly with those people and make sure that any bugs that are kind of minor on the face of it, but cause a blocker that stops people from feeling good about when they use the data. So you have to be quite active in the early bits to get that cultural buy-in. But once it's there and people are seeing their colleagues use it effectively, it very quickly builds momentum for a wider adoption across the firm. So maybe like 6 months to get fully up to speed, and then where there's quite a lot of engagement. And then after that, it's quarterly check-ins, or maybe even fewer, just to make sure that no one's dropping off. Beauhurst is quite good in that they give you usage stats every time you meet with them. So if there are people that are using it a lot less, you can go talk to them, say, is it because it's not useful? What's the problem? And often there's quite an easy fix.
Nice. I think just to add to that, for those subscriptions, 5 licenses up, you also have dedicated CX support. So you'll always have AM support. You'll always have me. I'm always happy to jump on trainings with the team. And part of our onboarding is first training, second training, graduation training, getting those new users comfortable. So worth mentioning that as well. Let's see. We've got a question here, Peter. Can you share an example of where data insights significantly shifted your investment decision, either positively or negatively?
Sure. It's a good question. The big one has been around the investment strategy of this British co-investment fund. So there has been a long-held belief within Britain that what deep tech companies need is patient capital. Capital that is going to stay with them through thick and thin, that's not going to push them to commercialize too early, that's going to give founders enough time to make their products the very best. We have known for quite a long time that sits quite squarely at odds with lots of investor sentiment around the world, particularly in the US. And so we've always been a little bit skeptical about that is what drives great valuation gains for companies. And so as part of our development of the investment strategy for this new fund, and where we looked at all of these part sets, we were very pleasantly surprised, I guess, to find that once a company within our sectors of interest, which can broadly be defined as deep tech and impactful, once they hit that their first 20 million plus growth stage round, typically those that are going to exit do so within about 2.5 years, and the vast majority do so under 5 years. So once you hit growth stage, what you really want to do is to exit quite quickly. And if you're not going to be able to achieve that, it's far less likely to happen. The other part of that dynamic, that momentum investment strategy, is that you want to join funding rounds that are bigger, because not only does that dramatically increase the company's chance of success, but they tend to drop future investment rounds, which means that you don't suffer from, over the long run, more dilution. So again, that kind of challenges a commonly held narrative about, drip feeding companies so that you're always a little bit too risk averse and we'll only give you enough money to get to the next milestone and a little buffer. But actually what companies, particularly at the growth stage, need is enough capital so that they can get to their milestone and beyond and do any pivots that they need without being hamstrung from a lack of capital. And whilst there were inklings of that sentiment within the team, seeing it borne out by data was very important in us thinking about how we're going to deploy the next fund. Also quite nicely aligned when I then went and had lots of conversations with other quant-based funds about their own investment strategies in a range of different sectors around the world. And then if you layer on human psychology and other things, it kind of makes sense. I don't know how much that's confirmation bias I should flag, but it's definitely made us feel confident in the way that we have been investing.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thank you, Peter. Conscious of time here, and I appreciate there are a few questions that we haven't been able to get to, but leave those with us, and I'll make sure that we get an answer to you. Fantastic. Thanks again, Peter, for your time. It was awesome to have that conversation. Super engaging. Yeah, I hope everyone's found today's session. If you have any questions, please do feel free to reach out to me. My email is daniel.defty@beauhurst.com. But I'll also share that after the fact. And keep an eye out for a recording of the session. Will be popped to you in your inbox. And just one last thank you again for Peter for joining us and for all of you for joining us. There's some fantastic questions in there. And very much looking forward to the next one.
Thank you very much, Dan. And if anyone wants to touch base, just please add me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to talk all things data for till the cows come home.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Thanks all and have a great day.
See you.